The hall was large enough to swallow a city block whole, and every seat inside it was filled except the ones reserved for Earth. I walked through the entrance of the Grand Conclave of Ethar Station carrying a briefcase that felt smaller and more embarrassing with every step I took. Every other delegation had at least 3 members. The Athari block had 11. The Varmeth arrived in a group of 7, all wearing matching silver armor with their homeworld crest across the chest. The collective sent 5 synthetic units who moved in perfect coordination like a single organism with 5 bodies. I was Owen Vance, Earth's sole diplomatic representative to the Interstellar Council, and the reason I stood alone was that the United Nations had cut the budget for this mission 4 times before I boarded the shuttle. I walked to my seat. The room went quiet. Not the respectful kind of quiet that settles over a space when something important arrives. The other kind. The kind that happens when something small and confused wanders somewhere it clearly does not belong, and everyone decides silently that the polite response is to say nothing at all. Councillor Dreth of the Athari block was the first to end that silence. He was tall and angular, and the particular shade of blue that made you think his evolutionary history had not been kind to him, and he had been making other people compensate for it ever since. He did not address me directly. He spoke to the room the way a professor addresses students, facing forward, making a point, assuming the subject of discussion is not worth consulting. "The human arrives," he said, "alone, as expected." I sat down. My chair had been placed at the far end of the council table, nearly an afterthought, as though someone had remembered to add it at the last moment and did not want to move anything else to accommodate it. I set my briefcase on the floor, opened my notepad, and wrote the date at the top. Old habit from years of meetings on Earth where writing something down was the only way to look calm when you were not. The session opened with formal procedure. 17 species at the table. The Council's first matter of business was whether Earth's provisional membership should be made permanent. Each species held 1 vote. I needed 9 to pass. I had spent the shuttle ride running the numbers. I thought I had 3 votes confirmed, possibly 4 if Ambassador Kale of the Synthetic Collective was in a generous mood. Dreth presented the case against Earth. He was thorough in a way that was almost impressive if you could separate the content from the intent. He had assembled data going back 200 years. Human average life expectancy, 72 years. Known genetic vulnerabilities, 37. Documented armed conflicts in the last century alone, 41. Environmental self-damage rating classified as critical. He listed our atmospheric chemistry failures, our agricultural fragility, our dependence on a single planetary ecosystem with no redundancy. He called humans biologically fragile, emotionally volatile, and structurally temporary. He said our species was less a civilization and more a work in progress that had not yet decided whether it intended to finish. Laughter moved through the room. Not from all 17 delegations, but from enough of them that it had weight, that it bounced off the high ceiling and settled over the table like something solid. I wrote the number 72 on my notepad, then directly below it I wrote 72 billion, which was my rough estimate of the total accumulated years of human experience across recorded history. Every human who had ever lived, multiplied by every year they had lived, all of it added together into one number. I did not show it to anyone. I was not making a point to the room. I was making one to myself, quietly, because I needed it. That was when I noticed her. She sat in the observation gallery above the main floor, the elevated section where royalty attended sessions without participating in votes. She wore the deep red of the Vorkon Empire, and she had a datapad resting on her knee, and she was not watching Dreth finish his presentation. She was watching me. Not in the way the rest of the room was watching me, with that mixture of clinical detachment and mild secondhand embarrassment. She was watching me the way someone watches a subject they have spent a long time studying and are now finally seeing in person. Careful, precise, measuring. When my eyes found hers, she did not look away. Most beings look away. I filed this information and held on to it. Dreth wrapped up. The Council voted to proceed with the Gauntlet of Merit before rendering a final decision on Earth's membership. The Gauntlet was a standing Council tradition, a series of challenges designed by existing member species to assess a candidate species for real-world value. 3 rounds, 3 different designing blocks. No candidate could skip or appeal. I had 48 hours before Round 1. I slept for 30 of them. Round 1 was delivered by the Athari block, a cognitive endurance test. Continuous strategic decision-making scenarios presented without pause for 72 hours. Each scenario built on the previous one. Resource allocation under famine conditions. Command decisions with partial and contradictory intelligence. Ethical choices where every available option caused harm to someone. The scenarios were designed to find the point where the mind failed, where the fatigue became too deep and the judgment became too slow, and the answers stopped coming. The council informed me before I began that no species had ever completed round 1 in its entirety. The Athari had designed it knowing that. Finding the failure point was the point. I need to explain something about running. I ran my first marathon at 19, my second at 20. I kept running them through my 20s, through 3 knee injuries, through periods when I was training in pre-dawn darkness before full days of work and study. When the United Nations recruited me at 28 and told me that diplomatic skill was more immediately useful than whatever my knees were currently offering, I stopped racing. But I did not stop understanding what I had learned. Running a very long distance teaches you one thing above all else, and it is not pace management or nutrition or breathing technique. It is that the body's signal to stop and the body's actual limit are not the same thing. They are separated by a distance most people never cross because the signal is convincing enough. It tells you in very clear terms that you are done. It uses pain and exhaustion and a persuasive biological desperation, but it is not the truth. The truth is further past it, and the only way to find it is to go through the signal and keep moving. I finished round 1 in 68 hours. Not fast, not elegant, but I crossed every threshold the Athari had placed in front of me, and I was still answering questions when the test administrators stopped asking them. Gareth looked at the results for a long time before he spoke. "Endurance without superiority," he said finally, "is irrelevant." I wrote that down in my notepad too. Round 2 came from the Varmeth. Their area of authority was biology, and they designed a challenge to match. I was placed in an environmental chamber. The temperature dropped to 4 degrees and then climbed to 41, and then dropped again. The atmospheric pressure shifted in cycles. The oxygen content fluctuated between levels that felt thin and levels that felt thick and stale. No equipment was provided. No suit, no supplemental breathing device. Just my body and the contents of my jacket pockets, which were a protein bar, a pen, and my notepad. By every objective measurement available to the Varmeth, human physiology was the weakest in the building. They knew that before they designed the challenge. That was the design. They wanted a live biological assessment. They wanted the data to confirm what Dreth's presentation had already argued in charts. What they observed instead required them to write a new section in their report. Humans have a relationship with physical suffering that developed through particular circumstances in our evolutionary history. Most species born into stable environments, or protected by advanced biology, learn to treat pain as a hard stop. When the signal reaches a certain threshold, the organism ceases the activity causing it. The signal and the limit are essentially the same point. This is efficient. It prevents damage. Our signal and our limit were separated by a gap our ancestors had crossed so many times that crossing it became, over generations, simply what we do. We do not override the signal. We do not ignore it. We carry it. We move with it loaded on us like weight, and we move anyway, not because we do not feel it, but because feeling it and stopping were never the same instruction to us. I moved. 6 hours into round 2, one of the Varmeth observers leaned toward her colleague and said something in her native language. My translator unit was small, built into my collar, and the Varmeth did not know its range. It caught her words. She said, "It keeps going." She said it with the specific confusion of someone witnessing something that does not fit any category they own. That sentence did more for my morale than anything else that happened across all 3 rounds. Round 2 ended. I sat on the chamber floor and ate the protein bar. It tasted like compressed chalk and artificial sweetener, and it was, without question, the finest thing I had consumed in years. Saerith found me during the recess on the second day. I had gone to a service corridor on level 4, near the atmospheric recyclers, because I needed somewhere that smelled like machinery, and not like the combined biological output of 17 alien species crammed into a diplomatic venue. The corridor had no windows and very poor lighting, and no reason for anyone of importance to be there. She walked in like she already knew exactly where I would be. "You are doing this wrong," she said. "I am still standing," I said. "They are measuring you against their standards," she said. "You keep trying to reach those standards. You do not need to reach them. You are already winning by standards they have not thought to apply." I looked at her directly for the first time without a gallery railing and 40 feet of height between us. She was taller than she appeared from a distance. Her eyes were a color I did not have a word for, something between gray and violet and something else entirely that those 2 colors do not cover. Her datapad was tucked under her arm. "You have been watching me since I walked in," I said. "I have been studying human beings for 11 years, she said. "You are my primary research subject. Watching you in person rather than through recorded files is a significant data upgrade." "Should I be flattered or worried?" I said. "Probably both," she said. She was not smiling exactly, but something in her expression acknowledged that what she had said was intended to be slightly amusing. I know about Shackleton's expedition, and every man who went with him into the ice and came back. I know about the Apollo program, which your species operated using computing hardware weaker than my writing instrument. I know about the siege of Stalingrad and the soldier at Marathon, and every attempt on the summit of Everest that ended in failure followed by the next attempt that went anyway. I know what your species does when every reasonable assessment of a situation says to stop. What does it do? I said. It does not stop, she said. The recyclers hummed. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Why does that matter to you? I said. She considered this carefully before answering. I would learn that she always considered carefully before answering. It was not hesitation, it was precision. The galaxy is very old, she said. Most of what it respects is old things, long histories, accumulated power, deep biological advantages built over millions of years. Your species has none of that. You have been in space for barely 2 generations. You arrived here with 1 planet, 1 representative, and a briefcase. She paused. And you are still here. That is either spectacularly foolish or genuinely extraordinary, and I have been attempting to determine which for 11 years. What is your conclusion? I said. She picked up her datapad from under her arm, tucked it under the other one, and walked back toward the main corridor. Round 3 is tomorrow, she said without turning around. Do not overthink it. Round 3 was designed by Kale and the Synthetic Collective. Of all the council blocks, the collective had maintained the most neutral position on Earth's candidacy. Synthetic species evaluate differently from organic ones. They are not subject to the biological pride that makes some species frame assessments as competitions they are determined to win. The challenge was a negotiation. 2 factions with a documented history of genuine conflict were placed in an adjoining chamber. 4 hours to broker a ceasefire. The task appeared straightforward. Every species that had attempted it before me had treated it as a logical problem. They mapped the structural points of disagreement. They proposed rational solutions based on resource division and territorial compromise. They built frameworks. They used data. Several of them had presented extraordinarily elegant analytical approaches. All of them had failed. I did not bring a framework. I sat down with the first faction and I said, "Tell me about the people you lost." A long silence followed. Then they told me. They told me about specific individuals, about what those individuals had meant, about the particular shape of what was missing now that those people were gone. They talked for a long time. I listened without interrupting or redirecting or noting anything on my pad. I just listened. Then I moved to the second faction and asked the same question. What happened in hour 2 was not something I planned. It was something that occurs when 2 groups of people have each felt, separately, that someone has taken the time to understand what they actually lost, rather than what they officially lost on paper. By the middle of the second hour, both factions were in the same room. Not because I had engineered it, because the presence of someone willing to listen had created enough lowered tension that they were willing to be in the same space. And once they were in the same space, the conversation I had facilitated became a conversation they were having with each other. There was no formal ceasefire agreement at the end of 4 hours, but there was a document. Both factions signed it. It stated that they were willing to continue speaking under neutral conditions. Kale came to me afterward and said, in the level voice synthetic beings use for all information regardless of its emotional weight, that in 600 years of gauntlet history, across every species that had ever attempted this round, no observer had ever seen both factions sign anything. Dreth said my approach was manipulative. Kale said, it is called empathy. Humans developed it as a functional social tool approximately 4,000 years ago and refined it continuously since. The collective has been attempting to replicate it computationally for 2 centuries. We have not yet succeeded. Dreth made a sound that my translator declined to render into any language I spoke. The final vote was held the following morning. 8 votes in favor, 8 votes against, 1 abstention. The abstention belonged to the Vorkon seat, which Saerith held in the gallery as an observer. She was not permitted to vote. She could only watch. Under council law, a tie meant the default outcome applied. Provisional membership was not renewed. Earth had 90 days to remove its representatives from Ythar Station. Dreth stood and said, with the smooth graciousness of someone who has won completely and can now afford to be generous, that he sincerely hoped humanity would develop further in the coming century and present its case again when it was better prepared. I sat without moving. I was calculating what I would say to the UN briefing committee. I was thinking about the 41 other people who had spent years building toward this moment. I was thinking about a service corridor and a datapad, and eyes without a color name, and the sentence, do not overthink it. Then Sayrith Vor stood up from the observation gallery. Not from the delegate floor, from the gallery itself. This was not done. It had not been done in this chamber within any recorded period of the Council's history. The gallery was for observation. It was not a platform. She stood. She placed her datapad on the railing in front of her. She spoke in the formal Vorkhan ceremonial register, which my translator rendered with visible care, each word slow and precisely placed. "I invoke the Aketh Vor," she said. Someone at the table made a sharp sound. I could not identify which species it came from. What I could identify was that every being in the room had gone completely still, in the way living things go still when something unprecedented enters the space. I did not know yet what the Aketh Vor was. I would learn it within the hour. It is an ancient provision of Vorkhan royal law, older than the Council by many thousands of years. It grants a princess of royal blood the right, in formal session before any governing body, to declare a mate bond as a sovereign legal act, not ceremonial, not symbolic, a binding legal instrument with the full weight of Vorkhan imperial treaty law behind it. The mate bond extends protected ally status to the chosen individual and their species, superseding all council membership proceedings and deliberations entirely. She looked at the full council. Then she looked at me. "I have studied the human species for 11 years, she said, still in that formal register. "I have found no species more deserving of a long future than one that lives so short a life, so completely." She said my name, Owen Vance. She said Earth. Dreth produced a sound I had heard before, specifically from a drain backing up at my parents' house during a heavy rainstorm when I was 12 years old. He began to speak. His legal team, 3 of them, leaned together rapidly. Then one of them placed a hand on his arm, slowly shook his head. The room remained very quiet. I realized my mouth was open. I closed it. Across the table, Kale's head tilted at the angle I had learned to read over 3 days. The angle that, in a being without conventional facial expression, corresponded to what a human face would call satisfaction. The treaty protections activated automatically under the Aketh Vor Declaration. Earth's status shifted from provisional candidate to protected partner of the Vorkhan Empire. A guaranteed seat review in 10 years. Full diplomatic immunity for every human representative operating in council space. Access to Vorkhan trade corridors, medical archives, and 17 active research installations across 4 star systems. It was more than permanent membership would have provided. Dreth filed 3 formal objections before the session closed. His legal team examined all 3 and informed him, one by one, that none of them had standing under any applicable body of law. Later, in the service corridor on level 4, I leaned against the wall near the recyclers and looked at her for a while before I said anything. "Was this always what you intended?" I said. "No," she said. "I intended research. The certainty came later." "You understand what you have done to your political position," I said. "I calculated the costs in year 3 of my research," she said. "I found them acceptable then. I find them acceptable now." "You did this for a species you have only read about," I said. "I did this because the evidence was clear," she said. "And then because the evidence became something that evidence alone does not fully explain. Something the datapad does not have a field for." I looked at her. "I have not agreed to anything yet," I said. She looked back at me. That expression from the gallery, still without a name in any language I spoke. Somewhere between absolute certainty and something warmer and larger than certainty. Something that did not have a category yet, and probably deserved one. "No," she said, "but you will." She was right. I would learn that she was right about most things. High Sovereign Vor met with me the following morning in a private chamber. He was the oldest living member of the Vorkhan royal line, and he had the particular weight of something that has had an enormous amount of time to become exactly what it is. He studied me for a long time before speaking. I let the silence run because I have learned that the first person to fill a silence in a high-stakes room usually gives up more than they intended. "My daughter has never been wrong," he said. He said it with the tone of someone reporting a fact they had tested carefully and verified repeatedly over a long period. "I have been told she is thorough," I said. "She is the most thorough analytical mind in 4-star systems," he said. "She has also refused every political alliance, every formal introduction, and every arranged partnership I presented to her across 9 years." He let that settle. "Until now. I understand why that is relevant," I said. "It is context," he said, with a precision that reminded me strongly of his daughter. "Context for this." He gestured at the space between us, a gesture that seemed to include everything that had happened in the last 3 days. Then he said something I did not expect from a man who had just had his daughter rewrite galactic law unilaterally. "She chose well." He dismissed me with a movement of his hand that carried the weight of someone who has been ending conversations with that same gesture for centuries. I took my exit and left. Walking back through the station corridors, I passed a long external window. Deep space stretched beyond it in every direction. Stars scattered across the dark in numbers that stop meaning anything if you look at them too long. The star at the center of our solar system was not visible from this angle, too far and too dim among the density of everything else out there. But I knew its bearing. I had memorized it on the shuttle coming in, the way you memorize the direction of home when you are traveling somewhere you have never been and are not certain you will leave easily. I thought about the 41 people who had worked for years to bring Earth to this point. I thought about the ones before them, the engineers and the astronomers and the linguists and the politicians who had been wrong about almost everything except the direction they were facing. I thought about every human being who had ever stood in a space far too large for them and stayed anyway. I thought about 68 hours of decisions with no clean answers. I thought about a cold chamber and a protein bar on the floor and a researcher who said it keeps going in a voice full of genuine confusion. I thought about two factions who stopped talking to me and started talking to each other. I thought about a service corridor and a data pad and eyes without a name for their color. Kale found me at the window. He stood beside me in the precise stillness of synthetic beings. No small movements, no weight shifts, no fidgeting. I had spent 3 days learning to read him anyway. The council will adjust to the new arrangement, he said. Will Dreth adjust? I said. No, said Kale. But Dreth is in poor metabolic condition, and statistically the council will outlive him by a considerable margin. I laughed. It came out louder than the corridor expected. Kale's head moved to that angle. The collective has studied human laughter for 200 years, he said. Still cannot replicate it, I said. We believe it requires the simultaneous experience of finding something both very bad and very funny, he said. We have not been able to achieve both states at once. It takes practice, I said. So we have observed, said Kale. It appears to be one of your more efficient adaptations. The collective considers it underrated. He left without ceremony, the way synthetic beings leave, one moment present and then simply not. I stayed at the window. Somewhere behind the angle of the station hull, past the distances I could not see across, was a small yellow star. Around it, a small blue planet. On that planet, 8 billion people who had woken up that morning with no idea what had happened in a room full of alien diplomats at the edge of their known universe. 8 billion people going about ordinary days with no knowledge that a princess from an empire 4 systems distant had stood up in formal session and said 2 words that changed the legal standing of every human being alive. They did not need the details. The details were mine to carry. What they would eventually know, what would make the news and the history records and the disagreements at dinner tables for the next 100 years, was simpler. Humanity's place in the galaxy was secure. We were protected. Something out there, something old and powerful and watching carefully, had looked at everything we were, all the fragility, and all the stubbornness, and that very particular human inability to register that we are supposed to stop, and had decided we were worth keeping. I picked up my briefcase. I had a report to file, a council representative to contact, and a princess who had done 11 years of research on my species to go have a very long conversation with. I went back to work.